Welcome to July 4th weekend. This is Kent Hance, best storyteller in Texas. And today we're going to be talking about July the 4th and the Declaration of Independence. And that the saying of the day, freedom is not free. And that goes back, you go back to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There were 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. And of that 56, 5 were caught and tortured and killed. So, it was serious business. There were 12 that had their houses burned and their farms burned to the ground. And a lot of the people wound up broke. They died penniless, but they died free. And they'd tried everything, and they'd had the First Continental Congress, which was the original 13 states. And Georgia was not there, but later they sent people. And they started trying to do things to work out a compromise with the British. They passed what they called the olive branch and sent it to King George. And that was, they would still be under his rule, but they'd be a separate country. And they thought that might work. He refused to see the people that brought it and refused to read it. So they knew pretty well, that they didn't have much of a chance. The olive branch was not working. There had been battles and there had been bloodshed. And so on July 2nd, many signed what was going to be the Declaration of Independence, and then finally signed it on July 4th. Historians have argued that some of the people waited until August the 4th to sign it, that it was not a mad rush to be the first guy to sign it, because you knew that, that there were going to be troubles for you. And they signed it and started appointing people to work with other countries to try to borrow money, to try to raise militia, and move forward as a separate nation. And all of that time, they finally got into the Revolutionary War. And of the 56 people that signed the Declaration of Independence, 2 of them later became president, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Those 2, and I think this is remarkable, those 2 died on July 4th, 1826, 50 years to the day, and they both died same day. And then Monroe died. He was later president, but he did not sign the original. He died in 1831, some 5 years later on July the 4th. No other president had had any contact with July 4th as being dying on that day. Calvin Coolidge was born on July 4th. So it's a big day in our history. We got our independence and set up the federal government. And if you look at the people that sacrificed, they spent a lot of time in writing the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson did it primarily over 17 days in a house, a rented house in Philadelphia that was called Independence House. And he spent a lot of time by himself writing it. Back then, they didn't have things to distract you. It'd be hard to be anywhere, alone and write 17 days a Declaration of Independence and what needed to be done moving forward. There were a lot of people that were involved in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. Some of them lost their lives and some of them lost their livelihood, but it took a lot of courage on their part to do so. And I think we have to remember that on July 4th. It's a day of celebration, be with family, a day to have fireworks and hope that you come back with 10 fingers that you left with when you go to the fireworks. Had a guy in Dimmitt one time that he had a Roman candle, he thought. Well, it was a skyrocket. So those little skyrockets, they have it cheap wood, it splinters up easy. And so he is going to hold it like a Roman candle he had been drinking a little, and he lit it, and they like never picked all the splinters out of his hand. Took almost all night working on him. And then we had a rodeo in Dimmitt one time, and it was amateurs and some of the local football players wanted to show how tough they were. And one of my friends, Ken, he rode in the rodeo, and he wanted to go bareback, and they didn't have professionals running it, and they didn't have the gate up tight. So, he got on the horse, and the horse bucked in the chute and threw him off in the chute and almost trampled him to death in the chute. He almost died in the chute. They gave him an award called the Sportsmanship Award. And one of my other friends called it the Dumbass Award, that he would get on a horse and try to ride bareback and be a cowboy at the rodeo, show that he is going to be a tough football player. And he is so bunged up he couldn't play football that fall. Had to wait till the next year. A couple of other things on July 4th. The Philippines, in their independence was July 4th, 1946. They'd been a territory, and they became an independent republic, independent nation. One other thing, that in 1802, West Point was established on July the 4th. I don't know if any of you ever visited West Point, but I visited once during football season. The leaves were turning, and it just a great atmosphere. Makes you proud to be an American, and that's the number one training facility in the world for people that are going to be in the military. And they train them well, and that goes back to 1802 when we had the training at West Point, and it's huge in our history. Also, in 1884, the Statue of Liberty was presented to the Secretary of State and other U.S. officials in Paris on July the 4th in 1884. And that was a big item, and since it was shipped here later, but it is a big part of our history. I was reading things that have happened on July 4th, and in 2002, Ted Williams passed away, and he is the last hitter that hit over 400. His last year that he was up, he hit like 417. That's just incredible. And that his hand-eye coordination was probably the best of all time. I think that it's important we celebrate the 4th, but it's important that we not just have a good time and have barbecue and parades and all that. They need to think about the 56 people that signed that declaration. That had to be a hard signature. You're away from home. You're in Philadelphia. Some of the ones at the Second Continental Congress got there late were from Georgia. They had a good ways to travel. And you sign that, it's going to get out, and that it's published, and that the British are going to put you on the hit list. And did, and some of them lost their lives over it. But I look back to visiting Arlington Cemetery, and I would encourage everyone, if you've never visited Arlington Cemetery, you should, or the Punch Bowl in Hawaii. The number of graves that line up, for hundreds of yards of young men and young women, but especially in the early wars of young men, that their futures died right there, and they had everything in front of them, and they gave the ultimate. And without being the home of the brave, you won't be the home of the free, and vice versa. And it's very important that we recognize this on this day and have a good time and everything. But just think about those 56 people that originally signed the Declaration of Independence, because you're saying in the Declaration of Independence, it hits the British pretty hard. And that so it wasn't a compromise. They tried that with the olive branch. The British, after that, in years and even century later, in some instances, they lost all of their sovereign rule over different nations. They still have connections with Canada and Australia, but at one time, remember, they had United States, they had India, had Pakistan, had Australia, had Canada, and those reporting directly to the kingdom and the government in England, and that has changed dramatically over a period of time. Colonies worked for a while, but the people that were citizens of the colony, they wanted freedom. And in some cases, they've been a lot better off. Some cases, they haven't been. But at least they had choice to form what kind of government they wanted, and they had freedom and liberty. And it might set them back in some ways economically, but it was certainly, in their opinion, worth it. I would just say that this is a strong time to remember those that have given the ultimate sacrifice. And I see the Wounded Warrior Project and other projects where we try to honor and try to make it accommodating for the soldiers who have given their ultimate in their capacity that she or he was involved in. I mentioned once before the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is my friend C.Q. Brown. C.Q. Brown, he's one of the few people in the nation that's been appointed by Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, that's a small group, get to the appointment of those two. And he was appointed chief of staff for the Air Force, head guy in the Air Force, and was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff within the last 2 or 3 weeks. He's originally out of San Antonio, came to Texas Tech, was involved in ROTC, went into the Air Force, flew fighter planes, and still to this day flies. And he was visiting us once last year in Lubbock, and I had him speak to the basketball team, and you could hear a pin drop. They were really impressed with him. He made a great statement to them about what he was doing and why it's so important to have a strong military. A couple of the kids talked to him later about, how do you get in the military when you're through with basketball or something like that. So he invokes a lot of pride in a lot of youngsters that he meets with, and a lot of pride in people in the military. He's subject to the commander-in-chief, and the president's going to set a lot of policy that you have to carry out. But number one policy we have, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or anyone else in the military, is the national security. And there are other things that come up, but you look at all that's going on in the world today, whether it's in Russia, in Ukraine, or in China, or still back in Afghanistan, that still has not been resolved. There's still over 1,000 American people that are missing in action in Afghanistan. Saying of the day, freedom is not free. And that's what we touched on today. I hope you have a great day and great celebration July 4th weekend. It's a fun time, but it's a very sobering time when you think about the 56 people that signed that petition that was really, in effect, a death warrant for you, and also a financial death warrant. And but freedom is not free. There's a lot of sacrifice along the way. This is Ken Hance, best storyteller in Texas. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.